Hello, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? I feel like I'm like Bubble Boy or something like that stuck behind here, but at least I get to take this off. It is great to see happy faces and people I haven't seen. Happy Monday. For those who I have not met yet, I am Ian Solomon, Dean of the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. Do we have people actually streaming this? Are we live or not? Yes, we are. Great. Welcome to all of you somewhere else. You're missing this amazing day today in the Rotunda. But whether you are here in person or joining remotely, I want to welcome you to the first Batten Hour of the 2021-2022 school year. These are meant to be occasions for us to learn together and build our community. And it really is an honor and a privilege to be speaking to you under the dome of this historic rotunda. What a great, and seeing out the back door towards Old Cabell Hall with the bright sunny day, not for streaking, but for admiring. But what a reminder that the heart of this university is a library, a gathering place, a place for curiosity, inquiry, discovery. Now, some of you know that normally we hold Batten Hours in the Great Hall at Garrett, but that has become a favored classroom for students and faculty, so it's not available. And I think it's fair to say that adapting and adjusting to circumstances is our new normal, so welcome. And I appreciate your patience, and I apologize for those who feel they may end up getting fed less often by Batten this year. But we do have vouchers for dumplings after this talk, so don't worry, we're going to keep you fed today. Courtney's in the back with them. We're all set. But in all seriousness, I am profoundly grateful for the opportunity to be with you. I'm eager to get to know each and every one of you, hear what makes you excited about making a difference in this rapidly changing world that we have to learn to adjust and adapt within. So I had an emotionally rich weekend. I just mentioned to Gail that I was back in New York, where I was born and where I grew up. I was there primarily to drop off my son Miles for his sophomore year at NYU. And like I hope all of you, he's excited to have in-person classes this year. He enjoyed his first summer living in Charlottesville, but is eager to return to New York. And after dropping off Miles, I met up with a group of my oldest friends, 5 of us who have known each other for more than 35 years, and in some cases for more than 40 or 42 or 3 years, going back to elementary school together, in one case, nursery school. As a group, these friends and I have managed to get together several times a year, every year, and certainly every summer, even during COVID when we had a socially distanced reunion. And we've taken different professional paths, have divergent politics and passions, and yet there is something enduring about our commitments to each other as people. We've celebrated each other's weddings, and we are all still married to our spouses. We've celebrated the births of our children, our professional successes. We've also consoled our disappointments, mourned our losses. And this crew has stood with me for the joy of my swearing in for the Obama administration and also for the sorrowful funerals of my parents and my older brother. So yesterday morning, after saying goodbye to these friends in order to begin my drive back to Charlottesville, I decided to visit the cemetery where one of my grandmothers, a woman whom I never got to meet while she was alive, the cemetery where she is buried in Queens, New York. And I was reading the names and dates on row upon row of gravestones at this cemetery, established in 1852. Each name precious to someone, each person gone too soon. And I was in a gray, reflective mood to match the overcast day. And I was processing the emotions related to my 19-year-old son being off in college, my elementary school friendships, my grandmother, Nana, born in South Carolina in 1908, And I was thinking about my older brother, Sheldon, or Shell as I called him. He and I were raised together in the same household as legally adopted siblings. He was 8 years older and taught me how to ride a bike, how to hit a baseball, how to punch like Rocky Balboa, how to kick like Bruce Lee, more or less. We loved the same parents. We tussled with the same motley crew of other siblings and cousins. We shared a bunk bed in the same bedroom for a little while until one day, jumping off the top bunk, I crushed the lenses of his new eyeglasses, and then I got kicked out. Shell and I did not share the same biological heritage. I am mixed race, identify as Black, Jewish, American male. Sheldon was a full registered member of the Native American Sioux Nation, part of the Lower Brule tribe in South Dakota. And despite being raised and living most of his life in New York, Shell moved out to the reservation in South Dakota in his mid-40s. Now, we'd both been exposed to elements of Sioux culture by our mother's determined efforts. She did the best she could, and we learned rituals for honoring nature, about the 4 directions, and sweat lodge ceremonies, about the concept of 7 generations. But what drew Shell to the reservation as an adult was less about a deep spiritual connection. It was about the need for health care after he was discharged from a New York hospital with a leg injury and didn't have health insurance, and unemployed and not eligible for Medicaid. He could receive health insurance and care from the Bureau of Indian Affairs on the reservation. His first year or so seemed to go well. We would talk periodically by telephone about his new girlfriend, about his dog that he insisted was actually part wolf, about fishing on the Missouri River, where he was convinced there had been credible sightings of a sea monster. He was convinced. He wanted me to bring my kids out for a visit, and someday I would make the visit, I thought, but I never made the plans. And then one morning, 10 years ago this month, I received a call that Sheldon was in the hospital with a fractured skull. He'd been flown by helicopter from a jail cell on the reservation to the regional trauma center. And there were conflicting reports and suspicions. Had he been beaten? Had he been in a fight? Had he simply fallen off a concrete bench? Why was he in jail in the first place? So I flew to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to provide prayers and moral support at the hospital. I rented a pickup truck and drove the 2-hour drive out to the reservation to try to figure out what happened. Many members of our family joined the vigil in the hospital and the investigation on the reservation. And I spent several days interviewing people at the jail, in the tribal government, with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and others who had interacted with him in the days leading up to his injuries. And then in the evenings, I'd go back to the hospital and I'd read to my brother, who was in a coma, wondering if he could hear anything that I said, wondering what had really happened, wondering if he would recover. The investigation would ultimately involve the FBI. Sadly, Shell did not recover. He would have turned 57 years old this past Saturday, 2 days ago. Happy birthday, big brother. Shell's death was the result of policy failure at so many levels: in healthcare, in substance abuse treatment, in criminal legal process, in employment services and economic opportunity. It was also a personal failure in the lack of empathy and compassion while Shell was still alive. I indict myself for that judgment and also work to learn from the experience. On a deeper level, Shell's story, and far too many others very similar to it, amplifies the systemic failure of how this country treated and continues to treat and engage with the indigenous populations that inhabited this land and helped to shape our culture and our democracy. I am mindful that we are gathering here today on land that was once the home of the Monacan Indian Nation. They were displaced and dispersed like so many others, and I'm pleased that UVA is making progress to engage leaders of the Monacan community, and I look forward to the time when scholars and maybe some of you will fill the critical gaps in our shared history for deeper understanding. And just as my brother Shell's story cannot be primarily about his injury and death, but rather about a generous, humor-filled, family-centered life, the story of the Sioux and other nations is not only a story of mistreatment and genocide. It's also a story of survival and support and creativity and contribution and survival for the early English settlers. History has many layers. It takes courage sometimes to uncover them, and standing in this building, one feels the weight of history. As a child in New York, I had heard a lot about the mighty Iroquois Nation. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Iroquois created a confederacy that bound together 5 and then 6 separate nations that had long been at war with one another: the Mohawks, Onondaga, Cayuga, Oneida, Seneca, Tuscarora. Their constitution that brought them together into this confederacy commanded its leaders to have thick skin, 7 spans thick to be exact, to hold them steady against anger, offensive actions, and criticism. And their governing document goes on: in all of your deliberations in the Confederate Council, in your efforts at lawmaking, in all your official acts, self-interest shall be cast into oblivion. Cast not over your shoulder behind you the warnings of the nephews and nieces should they chide you for any error or wrong you may do, but return to the way of the great law which is just and right. Look and listen for the welfare of the whole people, and have always in view not only the present, but also the coming generations, even those whose faces are yet beneath the surface of the ground, the unborn of the future nation. Not bad policy advice or governing advice. Now that may not sound much like the US Constitution or even the Articles of Confederation, but actually this document that I just read from is believed to be part of the inspiration for the structure of the US government, along with pieces of European models. And Ben Franklin, we don't hear much about Ben Franklin here. We hear about Thomas Jefferson all the time. Go a little north, a lot about Ben Franklin. He cited the Iroquois model when he presented his plan for union in 1754. And he invited Iroquois council members to address the Continental Congress in 1776. In fact, to bring this back to Virginia, Franklin was first inspired by the Iroquois model in 1744, when one of its leaders, Canasatego of the Onondaga, spoke at the signing of the Treaty of Lancaster. And this is a treaty which the Iroquois ceded any claims to settled lands in the Shenandoah Valley for just 200 pounds sterling of gold and 200 pounds sterling worth of goods. Now, Canasatego told the representatives of the independent colleagues they should forge a confederacy, just as the members of the Iroquois Compact had. And he said, "We are a powerful confederacy, and by your observing the same methods our wise forefathers have taken, you will acquire fresh strength and power. Therefore, whatever befalls you, never fall out one with another." Now, Canasatego was said to have pulled a single arrow from his quiver and with minimal effort broke it in 2. But then he pulled out 6 arrows for the 6 tribes and showed how could not break them if they were unified. The bundle was too strong to be broken. His point was that tribes bound together are less vulnerable than separate tribes. Strength comes from unity. And according to some reports, Canasatego's example inspired the imagery in the US seal of the eagle holding 13 arrows in its claw, 1 for each colony. I find this story compelling as a reminder of the extraordinary challenges of uniting the early colonies into one nation. I forget how divided they were. They were distinct, antagonistic, separate nations lacking a common identity. Unity in America is a work in progress. It has never been a birthright. People look back, think things have gotten so disunified, but actually they've always been in this state of competition and conflict. As Colin Woodard describes in his book, American Nations, the 13 British colonies were actually 6 different cultural nations settled by different groups for different purposes. It was only when London began enacting policies that threatened all of them in different ways that they began to come together. And even then, it was very messy. The revolution, which I always thought was a kind of a unified battle, it was akin to a series of regional wars for independence with violent rampages and skirmishes between the colonies. Forging together was remarkable work of negotiation and leadership. And that's why I find our national model of e pluribus unum, out of many, one, so powerful, so important. It is at once an aspiration and an incredibly difficult assignment for all of us. I admire the leadership demanded to stitch together one nation out of many disparate ones. I appreciate the ability to identify areas of compromise and collaboration to build new and elaborate form of government that had never before been seen. Now, it may be obvious that I consider some of the compromises, particularly related to the preservation of slavery, to be tragic capitulations. I also suspect future generations will condemn many of our compromises and choices that we make today. The point I want to make is that we can abandon the myth of a unified past that is somehow unraveled. Rather, dealing with division is central to our democratic experiment and has been since the very beginning. I think this realization can be cause for optimism and courage. We can pull together and overcome our differences, even if it's messy. We have before, we will again. And we can start right here within the Batten community by getting to know one another. Our beliefs, our values, our principles, our common and disparate experiences. You've joined a special community, those of you who are new, and hopefully those of you who've been here for a while feel that it continues to be a vibrant and special community. But let me tell you a little about our newest undergraduate and graduate students. So our new students represent 20 different countries and almost half the states of the Union. The incoming master's candidates graduated from 40 different undergraduate institutions. 27 of the incoming students are the first generation of their family to go to college. We have 73 students of color, 14 student athletes, including 10 current athletes. 2 of our master's candidates are active duty officers. We have a city council member. We're joined by a former investment banker who came to Batten so we could examine the role of banking and financial regulatory policy and what role that could have in closing the wealth gap in America. There are people in this room with enormous experience already in public service. Each year, a small number of rising leaders in Virginia are selected for the prestigious Virginia Management Fellowship. We welcome 3 fellows into our program this year. We have a Peace Corps volunteer who was recently evacuated from the Gambia due to COVID. We have an ACC triple jump champion who grew up in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and dreams of becoming a diplomat. A few students with firsthand experience with our immigration systems. And I've enjoyed many of my early conversations. I was impressed by not sure if she's here at the moment, maybe she is, by the student who took off last spring to learn kite surfing in Hawaii, or the student who spent the summer working at a summer camp in Vermont, where they had gone as a child, or the student working on governance for one of this country's largest farm cooperatives, the student in Israel for the summer, the many online DC internships, so many more examples. I am eager to learn about your passions and your interests, and I urge the students here to learn about the interests and passions of our faculty and our staff. We can learn to have hard conversations together. We can be like different arrows that are strong together, celebrating the diversity of ideas and making an enduring commitment to the greater good of our community. Sitting in a cemetery yesterday, thinking about 4 generations of my own family's change, I thought about another insight borrowed from Native cultures. The significance of 7 generations has resonance in many Native American and First Nation cultures. Out of respect for where we are today, I'll explain by quoting an assistant chief of the Monacan Nation, George Branham White Wolf, talking about 7 generations. He says, Indians live 7 generations into the future. This means One must use his time on earth to try to make the world a better place for future generations by taking care of the earth and all the earth nurtures. Then the earth will still be good for generations to come, even for great-grandchildren 7 generations removed. This 7th generation principle relates to our responsibilities. It's a recognition of our duties as stewards of something larger than ourselves at this moment. It requires us to imagine who is already and who might in the future engage on these questions in this place. So raise your hand if you have met or been influenced by any of your grandparents. If you know a grandparent, raise your hand. Most people, and if you haven't, sorry. That's 3 generations, your grandparents, your parents, yourself. Raise your hand if you've met and been influenced by your great-grandparents. We have a few. Okay, that would be 4 generations. That's the furthest I can go back, and even that information starts getting sketchy and uncertain. Raise your hand if you've met or been influenced by your great-great-grandparents, 5 generations. We have a few. 7 generations. That's a substantial period, roughly 140 to 200 or so years, depending on the assumptions you want to make. We might think of ourselves as more or less 7 generations removed from the building of this building and the founding of this university. And here in 2021, we continue to be influenced by the choices and imagination and ethics of the educational pioneers 7 generations ago in shaping this institution. We're the beneficiaries of their wisdom, and perhaps they'll pay a price for their limitations. How will we, as a Batten community, still in our first generation, help shape our institution for future generations? What will be the forces of continuity and the forces of change? How will the work of our students and our graduates impact the world with lasting effect for hundreds of years? How will our research change policy thinking and action, and looking at Professor Volden, the effectiveness of lawmaking going forward? I think a 7-generation mindset can be an inspiration for us. You don't tackle petty, fleeting problems with a 7-generation mindset. Instead, you position yourself to make a contribution on important, enduring human public policy challenges: racism, environmental sustainability, global conflict, poverty, disease, authoritarianism. We can approach this work with a 7-generation mindset with humility about our own individual contributions and our own fleeting span of that time, while also recognizing the gravity and the privilege to invest in serious goals worthy of sustained dedication. We can recognize that, I think in 7 generations, very little is ever achieved alone. And we can take special care to value and acknowledge the contributions of others, both in the short term and long term. We can engage people who have different perspectives and different solutions. They will still be around 7 generations from now. How do we want to engage them? Can we learn to listen? Can we benefit from the strength of unity? And as I look back, as far as I can, I realize that going back that far, many people we actually meet are distant cousins. We're all family. In fact, there's an expression among the Lakota Sioux that translates as all my relations. We are all relatives. We may be highly dysfunctional, but we're still a human family. Importantly, one of the things that I think a 7-generation mindset offers is a reminder to have hope. Hope that we can make a difference. Our mission at the Batten School of generating knowledge to solve global challenges and cultivating leaders prepared to serve in a diverse and divided world is as compelling, at least to me, and I think to many of you because you're here, as compelling as ever. Despite the challenges we face, we know that effective policy and leadership improves lives, can save the lives of people. That is true for COVID-19, for climate change, for national security, for inequality, for risk to our democracy, for the treatment of indigenous populations like my brother, and more. And the inspiring message I hear over and over again from students and faculty alike is some version of, that's why I came to Batten, to be part of the solution. I know in our social media fed lens, all the bad news can feel hopelessly discouraging or overwhelming. But there has been enormous progress in the world, from reducing poverty to eradicating many diseases. We are here at a university because we know that people can change and evolve. Otherwise, why would we waste our time? Because we believe that knowledge and science can improve lives. Let's embrace the challenge and move forward in the search of solutions with hope, with curiosity, and maybe with 7 generations worth of patience. As I was leaving the cemetery in New York yesterday morning, I was passed by a small motorbike revving its engine loudly along. It reminded me of my brother Shell and one of his many mid-repair motorcycles he was often working on behind our father's house. Some of those bikes never, ever got fixed. For a moment, I could imagine Shell riding free, his long, thick black hair flowing with the breeze, a smile on his face. And in my imagination, he speeds up and loops around and pulls by me slowly with a confident grin. E, that's what he called me. E, let's take a ride. But I realized the face belongs to a younger version of my brother. In fact, it's his youngest daughter. She is a new generation and a new hope. I swing my leg over the seat to join her on the bike, and we ride off together. Thank you all for making the Batten School part of your journey. Let's use this time to create the friendships and commitments that will last 35, 40 years or more, and take good care of each other. Policy is everywhere. You can, you should, I hope you will lead from anywhere. Let's enjoy the ride together. So I'm going to pivot now to a conversation and open it up for questions, comments. If you have no questions or comments, you're going to stand up and introduce yourself. Open to faculty, students, staff, new people, old people, videographers. I'll do my best to answer your questions. If they're hard questions, I'll probably call on Craig or Aaron or Jill or someone else. I am going to leave behind this screen, though, because I feel like I'm in a bubble. Thank you, guys.